What would you do if everyone saw you as invisible? Just another face delivering paperwork. Until the moment when trained Navy SEALs watched in stunned silence as you took control of a crisis they couldn't handle. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez had learned to move through civilian spaces like a ghost. 6 months after leaving the Army's elite 75th Ranger Regiment, she discovered that most people couldn't see past the mundane uniform of a document courier. The khaki pants, polo shirt with Meridian Legal Services embroidered on the chest, and the wheeled cart full of legal documents made her invisible in the marble corridors of downtown Seattle's most prestigious office buildings. She preferred it that way. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every morning at 0600 hours, old habits died hard. Elena would arrive at the Courier Dispatch Center, load her cart with contracts, depositions, and court filings, and begin her rounds through the city's legal district. The work was simple, mindless, and blissfully free of the life-or-death decisions that had defined her previous 8 years in uniform. No strategic planning, no combat operations, no responsibility for keeping her squad alive in hostile territory. Just papers, signatures, and the occasional polite nod from receptionists who barely registered her existence. The Meridian building on 5th Avenue was her favorite stop. 23 floors of gleaming glass and steel housing, 3 major law firms, a consulting group, and what she'd recently learned was a discreet government contractor that specialized in maritime security. The building's lobby featured polished granite floors, abstract art that probably cost more than her annual salary, and a security desk staffed by guards who waved her through without a second glance. She was just Elena, the paper lady, as unremarkable as the potted plants or the elevator music. Elena's supervisor, Janet Morrison, had been clear about expectations during her first week. This job is about reliability and invisibility, Janet had explained with the kind of patronizing smile that suggested she was doing Elena a favor by employing a veteran. Our clients are important people handling sensitive matters. They don't want to be bothered by small talk or delays. Drop off the documents, get the signatures, move on to the next stop. Simple as that. The word simple had stung more than Elena cared to admit. For 8 years, she'd led reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, coordinated air support during firefights, and made split-second tactical decisions that determined whether her team came home alive. She'd earned a Bronze Star for valor after single-handedly extracting 3 wounded soldiers from a compromised position in Afghanistan. Her service record included commendations for leadership under fire, expert marksmanship, and advanced tactical planning. But to Janet Morrison and the rest of the civilian world, she was just another veteran who needed a simple job to ease back into society. Elena had tried explaining her background once, during a coffee break conversation with another courier named Mike. "Army, huh?" he'd responded with the glazed look she'd come to recognize. "My cousin was in the National Guard, did some training exercises, said it was pretty tough." The conversation had died there, and Elena had realized that most civilians couldn't comprehend the difference between weekend warrior training and 8 years of active combat operations. It was easier to let them assume she'd been a supply clerk or administrative assistant. The transformation from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez to Elena the Courier had been deliberately cultivated. She'd let her regulation short hair grow out to shoulder length, traded her precise military bearing for the slightly slouched posture of someone who'd never learned to stand at attention, and developed the habit of avoiding eye contact that made her blend seamlessly into the background of office buildings. When people looked at her now, they saw a woman in her early 30s who delivered papers for a living. They didn't see the tactical mind that had outthought Taliban fighters, the steady hands that had performed field surgery under fire, or the situational awareness that automatically cataloged every exit, potential weapon, and threat level in any room she entered. The irony wasn't lost on her. For the first time in her adult life, Elena felt truly invisible, and she'd convinced herself that invisibility was what she wanted. No more responsibility for other people's lives. No more pressure to make perfect decisions in impossible situations. No more weight of command. Just the simple satisfaction of completing her delivery route and going home to her small apartment, where the only person counting on her was her rescue cat, Murphy. But invisibility came with its own challenges. Elena had discovered that civilian life was full of unspoken hierarchies and social dynamics that were somehow more complex than military command structures. At Meridian Legal Services, she occupied the bottom rung of a ladder she hadn't even known existed. The lawyers treated her like furniture. The paralegals spoke to her in the tone usually reserved for particularly slow children, and the administrative assistants made it clear that document delivery was several steps below their own important work. The worst part wasn't the condescension. Elena had endured worse treatment from drill sergeants who were testing her resolve. What bothered her was the waste. She watched office managers struggle with logistics problems she could solve in her sleep, observed security protocols that any first-year soldier would recognize as inadequate, and listened to executives discuss crisis management strategies that ignored basic principles of tactical planning. But Elena the courier wasn't supposed to have opinions about such things. Her job was to deliver papers and disappear. Elena's route through the Meridian building had become routine enough that she could navigate it on autopilot. Third floor for Patterson & Associates, where the senior partner's secretary always made her wait exactly 3 minutes before acknowledging her presence. 7th floor for the investment consultants who treated her like she might steal their paperweights. 15th floor for Morrison, Klein & Banks, where the junior associates whispered about cases they thought were too sensitive for courier ears. And finally, the 22nd floor, where Blackwater Maritime Solutions maintained offices that looked more like a military command center than a typical consulting firm. She'd noticed the difference immediately. The security was tighter, the personnel more alert, and the atmosphere carried the distinctive tension of people accustomed to real stakes. The receptionist was a former Marine who'd recognized something in Elena's bearing and started nodding respectfully when she arrived. The few employees she'd glimpsed moved with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood that details mattered. But even there, Elena was just the courier. Her interactions were limited to dropping off sealed envelopes and leaving as quickly as possible. Elena's invisibility had become so complete that she'd started to forget who she used to be. The woman who'd earned respect through competence and courage was being slowly replaced by someone whose greatest accomplishment was completing her delivery route without incident. She told herself this was what she wanted, a simple life free from the complexities of leadership and the weight of others' lives in her hands. But late at night, when the adrenaline of combat missions was just a memory and the silence of her apartment felt suffocating, Elena wondered if she'd traded too much for the safety of invisibility. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Elena loaded her cart with the usual assortment of legal documents, checked her delivery schedule, and headed out into the Seattle drizzle that made every day feel gray and muted. She had no way of knowing that her route would soon intersect with a crisis that would shatter her carefully constructed invisibility and force her to confront the question she'd been avoiding for 6 months. Could you really leave behind who you were, or did that person just wait in the shadows until the moment when they were needed most? The elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor of the Meridian building, revealing the stark contrast that always struck Elena when she entered Blackwater Maritime Solutions. Gone were the soft pastels and abstract art of the law firms below. Instead, sleek black surfaces, tactical lighting, and the subtle hum of serious electronic equipment created an atmosphere that felt more like a military briefing room than a corporate office. Hey, Elena wheeled her cart across the threshold, automatically noting the reinforced door frames, the strategically placed security cameras, and the way the reception area was designed to funnel visitors through a single checkpoint. Her trained eye cataloged details that most couriers would never notice. The slight bulge under the receptionist's jacket that indicated a concealed weapon, the emergency communication equipment built into what looked like decorative wall panels, and the fact that every employee she could see moved with the distinctive alertness of people accustomed to danger. "Morning, Elena," said David Park, the former Marine who staffed the front desk. He was one of the few people in her daily routine who used her first name instead of just gesturing for her to approach. "Got something special for the boss today." Elena nodded, pulling out the sealed envelope marked for Commander James Mitchell, Blackwater's operations director. The envelope was heavier than usual, and she could feel the outline of what seemed to be photographs or technical documents inside. Not that she was supposed to notice such things. "He's in the conference room with some Navy consultants," Park continued, his voice carrying a note of respect that Elena rarely heard in civilian settings. "Big meeting about some contract they're bidding on. You can probably just leave it with me." Through the glass walls of the conference room, Elena could see 8 men gathered around a tactical display that showed what appeared to be shipping routes and maritime boundaries. Even from a distance, she recognized the bearing of military personnel. These weren't typical business consultants. The way they held themselves, the precision of their movements, and the intensity of their discussion marked them as active-duty special operations. "I need a signature confirmation," Elena replied, checking her delivery manifest. "Has to be handed directly to Commander Mitchell." Park glanced toward the conference room where the meeting was clearly reaching a critical point. Charts covered the table, laptops displayed satellite imagery, and the discussion had the focused urgency of people planning real operations rather than theoretical scenarios. "Those are Navy SEALs," Park said quietly, following her gaze. "Team from Naval Special Warfare Group 1. They're here because Blackwater landed a contract for maritime security in the Persian Gulf. Big money, big responsibility, and apparently big enough that the Navy wants to coordinate directly." Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She'd worked with SEALs during joint operations in Afghanistan, and she recognized the type of briefing taking place in that conference room. The satellite imagery, the route planning, the careful analysis of potential threats. It was the kind of strategic session that preceded dangerous missions in hostile waters. "Elena," Park's voice brought her back to the present. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced herself to focus on the simple task at hand. Deliver the envelope, get the signature, move on to the next stop. That was her job now. That was all her job required. "Just tired," she replied, though the truth was more complicated. Being this close to real military operations after 6 months of civilian routine was like hearing a half-remembered song that brought back memories she'd been trying to forget. Commander Mitchell emerged from the conference room with 2 of the SEALs, their conversation continuing as they walked toward the reception area. Elena had learned to make herself smaller when important people were conducting important business, but Mitchell had always treated her with a professionalism that suggested military background. "Rodriguez," he said, using her last name in a way that felt more familiar than the casual first names most civilians preferred. "Perfect timing. I've been waiting for those tactical assessments." One of the SEALs, a lieutenant with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years in harsh environments, glanced at Elena with the automatic threat assessment she recognized from her own training. His eyes took in her posture, her hands, her general alertness level, then dismissed her as non-threatening, just another civilian employee going about routine business. "Sir," Elena said, offering the envelope, "I need your signature for confirmation." Mitchell signed her electronic pad with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to processing paperwork under pressure. "Thanks, Rodriguez. Same time tomorrow." "Yes, sir." As Elena prepared to leave, she couldn't help overhearing fragments of the conversation resuming between Mitchell and the SEALs. Words like choke point, interdiction, and hostile waters created a picture of operations that would demand every skill she'd spent 8 years developing. The irony was bitter. Here she was, delivering papers about missions she was more qualified to plan than half the people in that conference room, but her role was to hand over documents and disappear. "The problem," the SEAL lieutenant was saying, "is that we're looking at a potential hostage situation in confined spaces. Ship-to-ship boarding operations where standard protocols might not apply. We need someone who can think tactically under pressure and adapt when the plan falls apart." Elena's hands tightened on her cart handle. She'd conducted exactly those types of operations during her time with the Rangers. Maritime interdiction, close-quarters combat, hostage extraction, all specialties that required the kind of experience you couldn't learn from manuals or simulations. "Rodriguez?" Mitchell's voice interrupted her thoughts. Was there something else? Elena realized she'd been standing there longer than necessary, obviously listening to a conversation that was none of her business. The professional thing to do was apologize and leave immediately. "No, sir, sorry, have a good day." But as she wheeled her cart toward the elevator, Elena caught more of the discussion. The SEALs were describing scenarios that she'd faced in real combat, talking through problems she'd solved under fire, planning for contingencies she'd learned to handle through hard experience. They were good, she could tell from their tactical thinking and the questions they asked. But they were also theoretical in their approach, working from training scenarios rather than the brutal education of actual combat. The elevator doors opened and Elena stepped inside, punching the button for the 15th floor. As the doors closed, she heard the SEAL lieutenant saying something about needing personnel with real-world experience in asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics. Elena stared at her reflection in the polished elevator doors. 6 months ago, that description would have fit her perfectly. She'd spent years developing exactly those skills, earning respect from some of the military's best operators, and proving herself in situations where failure meant death. Now she was invisible, delivering papers to people who were planning the kind of missions she used to lead. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor, where Morrison, Klein, and Banks maintained offices that felt like a different world from the tactical intensity above. Here, the concerns were billable hours, client retention, and partnership track politics. The most dangerous thing that happened was aggressive cross-examination during depositions. Sarah Chen, one of the junior associates, barely looked up from her computer as Elena approached with a stack of depositions. "Just put them on the desk," she said with the distracted tone of someone who had more important things to worry about than courier logistics. Elena had interacted with Sarah dozens of times over the past months, and the conversation was always the same. Minimal acknowledgement, quick transaction, immediate dismissal. Sarah was part of the invisible machine that kept the legal world functioning, but she was also several rungs higher on the civilian hierarchy than a document courier. "Busy morning?" Elena asked, more out of habit than genuine curiosity. Sarah glanced up with mild irritation. "Client crisis. One of our maritime insurance cases is turning into a nightmare. Some shipping company claims their security protocols were adequate, but pirates still managed to board 3 of their vessels in the Gulf of Aden. Now everyone's pointing fingers and demanding to know why the security consultants didn't prevent it." Elena's attention sharpened. Maritime security, piracy, boarding operations. The same topics being discussed one floor above by people who actually understood the tactical realities. "That sounds complicated," Elena said carefully. "It's a disaster," Sarah continued, apparently needing to vent to someone. The shipping company hired some big-name security firm that promised comprehensive protection. Turned out their quote, expert consultants had never actually dealt with real pirates in real situations. All theory, no practice. Now there are hostages, damaged cargo, and about $50 million in lawsuits flying around. Elena felt the familiar itch of a tactical problem that demanded solving. The situation Sarah was describing represented exactly the kind of failure that occurred when people confused theoretical knowledge with operational experience. Pirates didn't follow the rules taught in security seminars. They adapted, improvised, and exploited weaknesses that only became apparent under real-world pressure. "Have they considered hiring consultants with actual combat experience?" Elena asked, keeping her voice neutral. Sarah laughed, but not in a pleasant way. "Right. Like, there are a bunch of Navy SEALs sitting around waiting to help with insurance claims. The partners are scrambling to find anyone with credible maritime security experience, but apparently people with real qualifications are either still in the military or working for companies that charge 10 times what this client can afford." Elena nodded and prepared to leave, but her mind was racing. One floor above, Navy SEALs were planning operations that could prevent exactly the kind of disaster Sarah was describing. One floor below, lawyers were dealing with the aftermath of what happened when maritime security was handled by people who'd never faced real pirates in real combat. And somewhere in between, Elena Rodriguez was delivering papers, invisible to both worlds despite having the exact experience both groups desperately needed. The elevator ride to the next floor gave Elena time to process what she'd learned. The convergence of maritime security crises, both preventative and reactive, felt like the universe presenting her with a test she wasn't ready to take. For 6 months, she'd worked hard to convince herself that her military skills were part of a past she could leave behind. But listening to the SEALs plan operations and the lawyers deal with security failures made her realize that some problems required the exact combination of tactical expertise and real-world experience she'd spent years developing. Elena completed her remaining deliveries on autopilot, her mind occupied with tactical scenarios and operational planning that had nothing to do with document delivery routes. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she almost missed the emergency alert that would change everything. The afternoon routine had settled into its familiar rhythm when Elena arrived back at the Meridian building for her second round of deliveries. The Seattle rain had intensified, turning the streets into rivers of gray water that reflected the overcast sky. Elena's cartwheels squeaked slightly as she navigated through the lobby, past the same security guards who nodded absently, past the same polished granite surfaces that made every footstep echo. She'd been thinking about the morning's conversations during lunch. The SEALs planning maritime operations, Sarah Chen's frustration with inadequate security consultants, the strange convergence of problems that seemed to demand solutions she could provide but wasn't supposed to offer. The thoughts felt dangerous, like picking at a scab that was finally starting to heal. Elena had worked hard to build walls between her current life and her military past, but today those walls felt thinner than usual. The elevator carried her to the 7th floor, where Pinnacle Investment Group maintained offices that reeked of new money and old prejudices. Elena had learned to brace herself for these stops. Unlike the professional courtesy she received at Blackwater, or the distracted politeness of the law firms, Pinnacle treated service personnel like they were barely human. "About time," snapped Veronica Walsh, the office manager whose voice could cut glass. She was the kind of woman who wore expensive suits to mask her complete lack of substance, treating everyone below her perceived social status like they were personally responsible for ruining her day. "I've been waiting for those contracts for 20 minutes. Elena checked her watch. She was actually 3 minutes early according to her delivery schedule, but pointing that out would only make the interaction worse. "Sorry for any delay. I have your documents here." Veronica snatched the envelope without looking at Elena directly, as if making eye contact with a courier might somehow diminish her own importance. "In the future, try to be more punctual. Some of us have real work to do." The comment stung more than it should have. Elena had learned to let civilian rudeness roll off her back. But something about Veronica's tone triggered memories of drill sergeants who'd questioned whether a woman belonged in ranger training. The difference was that those drill sergeants were testing her limits to make her stronger. Veronica was just being cruel because she could. "I'll make note of that," Elena replied, keeping her voice level. She'd learned that responding to civilian hostility with military directness only made things worse. Better to play the role of the invisible courier who absorbed insults without reaction. See that you do, and next time use the service elevator. The main elevators are for professionals. Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she simply nodded and prepared to leave. This was the price of invisibility, accepting treatment that she would never have tolerated in uniform, swallowing pride that had been earned through blood and sacrifice. Some days the trade-off felt worth it. Today was not one of those days. The remaining stops on the 7th floor proceeded without incident. The accounting firm treated her with professional indifference, the consulting group barely acknowledged her presence, and the marketing agency was too absorbed in their creative crisis to notice her at all. Elena preferred the indifference to outright hostility, but the cumulative effect was exhausting. By the time she reached the elevator for her next floor, she felt like she was disappearing piece by piece. The 8th floor housed Meridian Property Management, which oversaw the building's operations and maintenance. Elena rarely had deliveries here, but today she was carrying lease amendments that required immediate attention. The offices were utilitarian compared to the glossy corporate spaces above and below, gray carpet, fluorescent lighting, and the practical furniture of people who worked with budgets rather than budgets that worked for them. Tom Bradley, the facilities manager, greeted her with the tired smile of someone who'd been dealing with building crises all morning. "Elena, right? You're earlier than I expected." "Traffic was lighter than usual," she replied, appreciating the simple courtesy of being remembered by name. "Lucky you. I've been dealing with elevator maintenance, HVAC complaints, and some kind of electrical issue on the 20th floor that has everyone panicking about their computer systems." Tom signed for the documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who processed paperwork all day. "Sometimes I think this building runs on crisis management and caffeine." Elena laughed politely, but her attention was caught by something in Tom's tone. "Electrical issues? That sounds serious." "Probably just old wiring acting up, but the tech companies are treating it like the apocalypse. You'd think their stock portfolios were going to collapse if their servers hiccup for 5 minutes. Tom handed back her electronic signature pad. "Still, better safe than sorry. We've got backup systems for everything important." As Elena prepared to leave, she noticed a building schematic on Tom's desk that showed emergency systems, evacuation routes, and infrastructure details. Her military training automatically processed the information: stairwell locations, mechanical room access points, fire suppression systems, and communication networks. The building was well designed from a safety perspective, but she could see potential vulnerabilities that would matter in a real emergency. "Is everything okay?" Tom asked, noticing her focus on the schematic. "Just curious about building layout," Elena said quickly, Professional habit from my old job. Tom's expression shifted slightly. What kind of work did you do before courier service? Elena hesitated. Most people didn't really want to know about her military background. And those who did usually had unrealistic expectations about what that experience meant. Security consulting, she said finally, which was technically true if you considered combat operations a form of security consulting. No kidding. We could probably use someone with that background around here. Half our security protocols were written by lawyers who've never faced anything more dangerous than aggressive litigation. Before Elena could respond, her pager buzzed with a priority delivery notification. I should get going, thanks for the signature. The elevator ride to the 12th floor gave Elena time to think about Tom's comment. It wasn't the first time someone had hinted that her background might be useful in civilian settings, but it was the first time the suggestion had come from someone who seemed to understand the practical value of security experience. Most people treated her military service like an interesting biographical detail rather than a set of skills that might apply to real-world problems. The 12th floor housed Sterling Financial Advisory, where Elena's final delivery of the day waited. The offices were designed to project stability and success, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and the kind of understated luxury that suggested serious money managed by serious people. Elena had been delivering documents here for months, but her interactions were always brief and professional. Margaret Sterling, the firm's founder, was waiting in the reception area when Elena arrived. Unlike most executives who delegated document handling to assistants, Margaret always handled courier interactions personally. She was a woman in her 60s who projected the kind of authority that came from decades of managing other people's financial crises. Elena, perfect timing, Margaret said, approaching with a thick envelope that felt heavier than usual. This needs to go directly to Blackwater Maritime Solutions on 22. Hand delivery to Commander Mitchell only. Elena accepted the envelope, noting the unusual weight and the confidential marking across the seal. Of course. Is there a rush on this? Margaret's expression grew serious. Unfortunately, yes. There's been a development in one of our clients' maritime security situations. 3 cargo ships were attacked in the Gulf of Aden yesterday, and we need Blackwater's immediate assessment of their security protocols. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. The attack Margaret was describing sounded like the same incident Sarah Chen had mentioned earlier, the maritime insurance disaster that was turning into a legal nightmare. That sounds serious, Elena said carefully. It is. 12 crew members taken hostage, millions in damaged cargo, and a security consultation that apparently wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Margaret's tone carried the frustration of someone dealing with preventable disasters. Our client paid top dollar for maritime security expertise, but it turns out their consultants had more experience with PowerPoint presentations than actual pirates. Elena's hands tightened on the envelope. The situation was exactly what she'd been thinking about all day, another case where theoretical knowledge had failed when confronted with real-world threats. Pirates didn't follow security manual procedures. They adapted to whatever defenses they encountered, exploited weaknesses that only became apparent under pressure, and used tactics that required hands-on experience to counter effectively. I hope they can resolve it quickly, Elena said, though she suspected the resolution would require the kind of tactical expertise that couldn't be learned from consulting firms. So do I. Blackwater has a reputation for getting results, but even they're going to be challenged by this situation. The hostages are being held on a hijacked vessel in international waters, and the pirates are demanding ransom that our client's insurance won't cover. Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, 12 people were counting on someone to save them from a situation that required exactly the kind of skills she'd spent 8 years developing. Maritime interdiction, hostage rescue, close-quarters combat in confined spaces. All specialties that she'd mastered through training and real combat experience. But Elena Rodriguez was just a courier now. Her job was to deliver documents, not solve international crises. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor felt longer than usual, weighed down by the envelope in her hands and the growing sense that her carefully constructed civilian life was about to collide with the military skills she'd tried to leave behind. The convergence of maritime security crises, both the prevention planning by the SEALs and the aftermath management by the lawyers, seemed to be demanding her attention in ways that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. When the elevator doors opened on Blackwater Maritime Solutions, Elena could immediately sense that something had changed since her morning visit. The usual professional calm had been replaced by the controlled urgency of people managing a developing crisis. Staff members moved with purpose. Phones rang constantly, and multiple computer screens displayed what appeared to be real-time tracking information. David Park looked up from his desk as Elena approached, his expression grim. "Elena, thank God you're here. The boss has been waiting for whatever Sterling Financial is sending over." Through the glass walls of the conference room, Elena could see Commander Mitchell and the Navy SEALs from the morning's meeting, but their discussion had taken on a new intensity. Charts and satellite imagery covered every available surface, and the body language of everyone in the room suggested they were dealing with an active situation rather than theoretical planning. "Looks like things have escalated," Elena observed. "You could say that, those hostages we were briefed about this morning? Turns out the situation is worse than anyone thought. The pirates have military-grade weapons, and they're moving the hijacked vessel toward Somalia, where extraction becomes exponentially more difficult." Elena felt her tactical mind automatically analyzing the situation. Moving hostages to a defended position on land was classic insurgent strategy. It eliminated the advantages of naval forces and created terrain that favored defenders who knew the local geography. Every hour of delay made successful rescue less likely and more costly. "That's complicated," she said, understating the tactical nightmare that scenario represented. "Complicated doesn't begin to cover it. The SEALs are good, but this kind of operation requires someone with experience in both maritime and land-based hostage rescue. Someone who's actually dealt with this kind of asymmetric warfare in real combat situations." Elena stared at the envelope in her hands, knowing it contained financial information that would help Blackwater assess the client's resources, but wouldn't solve the fundamental tactical problem. Somewhere in the Persian Gulf, 12 people were running out of time while experts debated strategies that might work in theory but had never been tested against the kind of adversaries they were actually facing. The weight of that knowledge was becoming harder to carry with each passing moment. Elena knocked on the conference room door, holding the envelope from Sterling Financial. Through the glass, she could see the tension radiating from every person around the table. Commander Mitchell looked up and waved her in, his usual professional demeanor strained by whatever crisis they were managing. "Rodriguez, come in. We need that assessment immediately." Elena entered the room, immediately noting the tactical displays that showed real-time satellite feeds of the Indian Ocean. Red markers indicated the hijacked vessel's last known position, while blue markers showed the approximate locations of naval assets in the region. The setup was sophisticated, but Elena could see gaps in the intelligence picture that would matter in a real rescue operation. "Here's the financial assessment from Sterling," Elena said, handing the envelope to Mitchell. As he tore it open, she couldn't help but observe the strategic discussion that resumed around her. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader she'd seen that morning, was pointing to a detailed ship schematic displayed on one of the monitors. "The cargo vessel has been modified since these blueprints were created. Intelligence suggests the pirates have welded additional barriers in the corridors and may have booby-trapped the crew quarters where the hostages are being held." Elena's eyes automatically analyzed the ship layout, her training kicking in despite her efforts to remain invisible. The vessel was a standard cargo hauler, but the modifications Morrison described would create choke points that favored defenders and complicated any boarding operation. Standard SEAL tactics assumed certain access routes and sightlines that might no longer exist. "What about approach vectors?" asked Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. Elena noted the shared surname with mild irony. "Can we get close enough for a silent insertion?" Morrison shook his head grimly. "The pirates have posted lookouts with military-grade night vision equipment. They're not the usual opportunistic criminals we typically encounter. Someone with serious training has been planning this operation." Elena felt her tactical mind automatically processing the information. The situation Morrison was describing matched patterns she'd encountered in Afghanistan, where insurgents had learned to adapt conventional criminal tactics with military planning and equipment. It suggested a level of sophistication that would require equally sophisticated countermeasures. Commander Mitchell finished reading the financial assessment and cursed under his breath. Sterling's client is hemorrhaging money by the hour, but they're also making it clear that they expect results. The insurance company is threatening to void the policy if we can't prove the security failure wasn't negligent. Sir, Morrison interjected, with respect, the financial pressure doesn't change the tactical realities. This rescue operation is going to require capabilities that go beyond standard maritime interdiction. We're looking at a hybrid scenario that combines ship-to-ship combat, close-quarters hostage rescue, and potential urban warfare if they reach Somali territorial waters. Elena found herself unconsciously leaning forward, her mind automatically working through the tactical challenges Morrison was outlining. She'd faced similar scenarios during joint operations in Afghanistan, where Taliban fighters had learned to combine conventional criminal activities with military tactics learned from foreign advisors. The key was understanding that hybrid threats required hybrid responses that couldn't be found in standard operational manuals. "What about local assets?" asked another SEAL whose name tape read Williams. "Can we coordinate with regional forces?" Mitchell pulled up a political map that showed the complex territorial boundaries in the region. That's where things get really complicated. The hijacked vessel is currently in international waters, but it's moving toward areas where 3 different governments claim jurisdiction. Even if we get permission for a rescue operation, we might have minutes to execute before the political situation changes. Elena studied the map, noting geographic features that would affect approach routes and extraction procedures. The coastline in the target area was dominated by rocky outcroppings and shallow waters that would limit the types of vessels that could operate close to shore. Any rescue operation would need to account for those limitations while maintaining flexibility to adapt if the situation changed. "Ma'am?" Chief Rodriguez had noticed Elena's focused attention on the tactical displays. "Is there something we should know about those financial documents?" "Rodriguez, come in. We need that assessment immediately." Elena entered the room, immediately noting the tactical displays that showed real-time satellite feeds of the Indian Ocean. Red markers indicated the hijacked vessel's last known position, while blue markers showed the approximate locations of naval assets in the region. The setup was sophisticated, but Elena could see gaps in the intelligence picture that would matter in a real rescue operation. "Here's the financial assessment from Sterling," Elena said, handing the envelope to Mitchell. As he tore it open, she couldn't help but observe the strategic discussion that resumed around her. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader she'd seen that morning, was pointing to a detailed ship schematic displayed on one of the monitors. "The cargo vessel has been modified since these blueprints were created. Intelligence suggests the pirates have welded additional barriers in the corridors and may have booby-trapped the crew quarters where the hostages are being held." Elena's eyes automatically analyzed the ship layout, her training kicking in despite her efforts to remain invisible. The vessel was a standard cargo hauler, but the modifications Morrison described would create choke points that favored defenders and complicated any boarding operation. Standard SEAL tactics assume certain access routes and sightlines that might no longer exist. "What about approach vectors?" asked Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. Elena noted the shared surname with mild irony. "Can we get close enough for a silent insertion?" Morrison shook his head grimly. "The pirates have posted lookouts with military-grade night vision equipment. They're not the usual opportunistic criminals we typically encounter. Someone with serious training has been planning this operation." Elena felt her tactical mind automatically processing the information. The situation Morrison was describing matched patterns she'd encountered in Afghanistan, where insurgents had learned to adapt conventional criminal tactics with military planning and equipment. It suggested a level of sophistication that would require equally sophisticated countermeasures. Commander Mitchell finished reading the financial assessment and cursed under his breath. "Sterling's client is hemorrhaging money by the hour, but they're also making it clear that they expect results. The insurance company is threatening to void the policy if we can't prove the security failure wasn't negligent." "Sir," Morrison interjected, "with respect, the financial pressure doesn't change the tactical realities. This rescue operation is going to require capabilities that go beyond standard maritime interdiction. We're looking at a hybrid scenario that combines ship-to-ship combat, close-quarters hostage rescue, and potential urban warfare if they reach Somali territorial waters." Elena found herself unconsciously leaning forward, her mind automatically working through the tactical challenges Morrison was outlining. She'd faced similar scenarios during joint operations in Afghanistan, where Taliban fighters had learned to combine conventional criminal activities with military tactics learned from foreign advisors. The key was understanding that hybrid threats required hybrid responses that couldn't be found in standard operational manuals. "What about local assets?" asked another SEAL whose name tape read Williams. "Can we coordinate with regional forces?" Mitchell pulled up a political map that showed the complex territorial boundaries in the region. "That's where things get really complicated. The hijacked vessel is currently in international waters, but it's moving toward areas where 3 different governments claim jurisdiction. Even if we get permission for a rescue operation, we might have minutes to execute before the political situation changes." Elena studied the map, noting geographic features that would affect approach routes and extraction procedures. The coastline in the target area was dominated by rocky outcroppings and shallow waters that would limit the types of vessels that could operate close to shore. Any rescue operation would need to account for those limitations while maintaining flexibility to adapt if the situation changed. "Ma'am?" Chief Rodriguez had noticed Elena's focused attention on the tactical displays. "Is there something we should know about those financial documents?" Elena realized she'd been standing there longer than necessary, obviously absorbed in strategic planning that had nothing to do with her courier duties. The professional thing to do was apologize and leave immediately, letting the actual experts handle the tactical problems. Instead, she heard herself saying, "The approach vectors you're considering don't account for the tidal patterns in that region." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Elena, and she could see the mixture of confusion and annoyance on their faces. She was the courier, the invisible woman who delivered papers and disappeared. She wasn't supposed to have opinions about tactical operations. Morrison's expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Elena felt her heart pounding, knowing she'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but the words kept coming, driven by 8 years of training that couldn't be turned off when lives were at stake. "The tidal currents in the Gulf of Aden follow patterns that change every 6 hours. If you're planning a silent approach using small boats, you need to time it with the slack tide periods, or the current will push you off course and compromise your insertion point." The silence stretched longer, and Elena could see the SEALs exchanging glances that ranged from skeptical to hostile. She'd just told some of the Navy's most elite operators that they'd missed a basic factor in their tactical planning. It was exactly the kind of presumption that could end her career and destroy any credibility she might have had. Commander Mitchell's voice was carefully neutral when he spoke. "Rodriguez, how exactly would you know about tidal patterns in the Gulf of Aden?" Elena felt the weight of 6 months of carefully constructed invisibility crumbling around her. She could lie, make some excuse about reading maritime reports in the documents she delivered. She could apologize and leave, hoping they'd dismiss her comment as a lucky guess from someone who'd overheard too many conversations. Or she could tell the truth and accept whatever consequences followed. "I spent 18 months conducting maritime interdiction operations in that region," Elena said quietly. 3 deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment, including joint operations with SEAL Team 6 during anti-piracy missions in 2019 and 2020. The room erupted in stunned silence that felt like a physical force. Elena watched as the men around the table tried to reconcile what she'd just said with their assumptions about who she was. She could see Morrison running through possibilities in his mind, trying to understand how a document courier could have classified knowledge about special operations. "You're telling us," Morrison said slowly, "that you've actually conducted the type of operation we're planning." "Similar operations, yes, sir. Maritime boarding actions, hostage rescue in confined spaces, and coordinated extraction under hostile conditions." Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke, the military bearing she'd suppressed for 6 months reasserting itself. "I was part of the task force that rescued the crew of the MV Copenhagen when it was hijacked off the Horn of Africa in 2020. Chief Rodriguez whistled low. "I remember that operation. 12 hostages extracted without casualties, pirates neutralized, and the whole thing executed in under 40 minutes. That was textbook special operations." "It was good teamwork," Elena replied, falling back on the military habit of deflecting individual credit. "But it was also exactly the kind of hybrid scenario you're facing now. Pirates with military training, modified vessel layout, and a timeline that didn't allow for conventional approaches." Commander Mitchell was staring at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I presume? Or did you achieve a higher rank?" "Staff Sergeant, sir. 8 years active duty, honorable discharge, 6 months ago." Elena felt strange hearing her rank spoken aloud after months of being just Elena the courier. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his tactical mind clearly working through new possibilities. If you've actually done this before, then you know we're facing a situation where standard SEAL protocols might not be adequate. Elena nodded, her professional instincts overriding her civilian caution. The pirates are using insurgent tactics combined with maritime expertise. They're not just criminals who got lucky with military equipment. Someone with serious training has been planning this operation, which means they've anticipated standard rescue approaches. So what would you recommend? Mitchell asked, and Elena could hear genuine interest beneath his professional skepticism. Elena moved to the tactical display, her muscle memory taking over as she pointed to specific features on the satellite imagery. The vessel modifications they've made create defensive advantages, but they also create vulnerabilities. The welded barriers that block your approach routes also limit their escape options. If you can force them to commit to defending specific positions, you can use those same barriers to trap them. She traced potential approach routes on the display, her tactical mind automatically calculating distances, timing, and resource requirements. The key is creating multiple simultaneous threats that force them to divide their attention. A conventional approach from one direction, while a secondary team exploits the maintenance access points they probably haven't secured. Elena realized she'd been talking for several minutes, outlining tactical approaches with the confidence of someone who'd executed similar operations under fire. The room was completely silent, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. "Rodriguez," Morrison said finally, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "Are you telling us that you've been delivering our paperwork for months while having more relevant experience for this operation than anyone else in this room?" Elena felt the full weight of her situation settling on her shoulders. 6 months ago, she'd made a deliberate choice to leave behind the world of tactical operations and life-or-death decisions. She'd wanted invisibility, simplicity, and freedom from the responsibility of other people's lives. But the skills that had kept her team alive in combat situations weren't the kind that could be turned off when convenient. "I didn't think it was relevant to my current job," Elena said quietly. Mitchell's expression had shifted from surprise to something approaching calculation. "Staff Sergeant, I think it's about to become very relevant indeed." The alarm that shattered the afternoon calm wasn't the gentle chime of a routine building notification. It was a harsh, penetrating wail that cut through conversations, stopped elevators between floors, and sent a chill down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. The sound triggered muscle memory from 8 years of responding to emergency alerts in combat zones, and her body reacted before her mind had fully processed what was happening. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the conference room, casting harsh red shadows across the tactical displays that suddenly seemed prophetic rather than theoretical. Elena's training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment, escape routes, personnel accountability, and resource evaluation all processed in the space of a heartbeat. Around her, the SEALs were having similar reactions, their casual meeting posture instantly transforming into the alert readiness of operators responding to potential danger. "What kind of alarm is that?" Morrison asked, his hand instinctively moving toward where his sidearm would be if they were in a combat zone. Commander Mitchell was already reaching for his phone, but before he could dial, the building's public address system crackled to life with a voice that carried barely controlled panic. "Attention all building occupants, this is not a drill. We have reports of armed individuals in the lobby area. All personnel should shelter in place immediately. Do not use elevators. Do not attempt to leave the building. Await further instructions from security personnel or law enforcement." Elena felt time slow down in the way it always did when training met reality. Her mind automatically shifted into tactical mode, processing information and calculating responses, while everyone else was still absorbing what they'd heard. Armed individuals in the lobby meant the building's primary exit was compromised. 22 floors up meant they were trapped with limited options for evacuation or escape. "Jesus Christ," Chief Rodriguez muttered, moving toward the conference room windows to get a view of the street below. "Are we talking about a robbery or something more serious?" Elena was already moving, her courier experience suddenly becoming tactical intelligence. "The building layout creates a bottleneck at the main entrance," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone thinking through a crisis. "If they control the lobby, they control access to the stairwells and service elevators." Morrison looked at her sharply. "You know this building's security profile?" I've been mapping it for 6 months without realizing it, Elena replied, her mind racing through every delivery route, every floor plan she'd observed, every security checkpoint she'd navigated. There are 4 stairwells, but 2 of them funnel through the lobby level. The service elevator has independent access, but it requires security card authorization. Mitchell was speaking rapidly into his phone, trying to get information from building security or local law enforcement. His expression grew grimmer with each exchange. David, what's the situation at your desk? Through the glass walls, they could see David park at the reception desk, his phone pressed to his ear while he typed rapidly on his computer. His Marine training was evident in his calm efficiency, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders that indicated a serious threat assessment. Park finished his call and approached the conference room, his expression grim. 3 armed individuals entered through the main lobby approximately 4 minutes ago. Building security tried to respond, but they were overpowered. The attackers have taken control of the security station and appear to be working from some kind of floor plan. Elena's tactical mind processed this information with growing concern. They have a floor plan. That suggests this isn't a random attack. Gets worse, Park continued. One of them was asking specifically about Blackwater Maritime Solutions. They knew we were on the 22nd floor. The implication hit everyone in the room simultaneously. This wasn't a random building assault or robbery gone wrong. It was a targeted attack against Blackwater, which meant the maritime hostage crisis they'd been discussing was now directly connected to their immediate survival. Morrison's training kicked in as he began issuing orders with calm authority. We need to assume this is coordinated with the Persian Gulf situation. Someone doesn't want us planning a rescue operation. Elena found herself thinking tactically despite her civilian status. If they're specifically targeting Blackwater, they probably have intelligence about this meeting and the personnel involved. That means they know about the SEAL team presence. Mitchell's phone rang, and he answered with clipped military efficiency. The conversation was brief but revealing from Elena's perspective. She could hear enough to understand that law enforcement response was being delayed by some kind of coordinated distraction events around the city. Backup isn't coming anytime soon, Mitchell announced after ending the call. Seattle PD is dealing with simultaneous incidents at 3 other locations. This is definitely coordinated. Chief Rodriguez had moved to a position where he could observe the stairwell access through the reception area windows. Sir, I'm seeing movement in the stairwell. Looks like they're moving up floor by floor, probably clearing rooms or looking for specific targets. Elena's courier knowledge suddenly became critical intelligence. Most of the floors below us have standard office layouts with limited defensive positions, but floors 15 through 21 house financial firms and consulting groups that require higher security protocols. They'll have panic rooms and reinforced office spaces that could slow down an assault. How long do we have? Morrison asked, his tactical mind working through timeline calculations. Elena closed her eyes, visualizing the building layout and estimating movement patterns based on her own experience navigating between floors. If they're moving systematically and checking each floor, maybe 20 minutes. Less if they're only targeting specific offices. Williams, who had been quiet during the initial crisis response, spoke up with the kind of observation that separated special operations personnel from regular military. This whole situation is tactically sophisticated. The timing, the coordination, the intelligence about our presence. Someone with serious resources is orchestrating this. Elena felt a chill of recognition. The pattern Williams was describing matched insurgent operations she'd encountered in Afghanistan, where enemy forces had learned to combine criminal tactics with military planning and intelligence gathering. It suggested they were facing adversaries who understood how special operations teams thought and planned. We need to consider the possibility that this is designed to eliminate the rescue planning capability, Elena said, her tactical analysis overriding her civilian instincts. If they can take out the SEAL team and destroy Blackwater's operational capacity, the hostages in the Persian Gulf become irrelevant. Mitchell's expression darkened as he processed the implications. Which means we're not just dealing with building security, we're dealing with an operation designed to prevent a military rescue. The building's ventilation system suddenly went silent, and Elena immediately recognized the tactical significance. They've cut the HVAC system. That's either to prevent gas dispersal from law enforcement or to limit our ability to move through the building's mechanical spaces. Morrison looked at her with growing respect. You're thinking like an operator. I am an operator, Elena replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I've been pretending to be a civilian for 6 months, but that doesn't change 8 years of training." Park's voice cut through their tactical discussion with urgent information. "Movement on our floor. I count 2 individuals exiting the stairwell and moving toward the elevator bank." Elena moved to the reception area, where she could observe the corridor without being seen. Through the glass doors, she could see 2 figures dressed in tactical gear moving with the professional efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't random criminals or opportunistic attackers. They moved like military personnel conducting a planned operation. "They're checking floor directories," Elena reported quietly, "and they're carrying serious hardware, automatic weapons, body armor, communication equipment. This is a military-style assault." The lead figure stopped at the building directory and pointed specifically at the Blackwater Maritime Solutions listing. Elena could see him speaking into a throat microphone, coordinating with other team members elsewhere in the building. "They're coming for us," Morrison said grimly. "Question is, do we wait for them to reach us, or do we take the initiative?" Elena found herself analyzing defensive options with the tactical precision she'd thought she'd left behind. The Blackwater offices were well designed for security, but they weren't built to withstand a military assault. However, her 6 months of courier work had given her knowledge about the building's infrastructure that even the attackers might not possess. "There's a service corridor that connects to the mechanical room on this floor," she said, her mind racing through possibilities. "It's not on the standard building plans, but I've seen the maintenance crews use it. If we can reach it, we might be able to move between floors without using the main stairwells." Mitchell looked at her with calculation in his eyes. "Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you prepared to go operational?" Elena felt the weight of 6 months of civilian life pressing against 8 years of military training. She'd worked hard to leave behind the world of tactical operations and life-or-death decisions. But 12 hostages were counting on the people in this room to plan their rescue, and now those same people needed someone with her specific combination of building knowledge and operational experience. "Sir," Elena said, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who'd made her decision, "I'm ready." Elena moved with the fluid precision of someone whose training had never really left, despite 6 months of deliberate suppression. The transformation was immediate and startling. Gone was the invisible courier who apologized for existing, replaced by a tactical operator whose every movement carried purpose and authority. She quickly assessed the Blackwater offices, identifying defensive positions, improvised weapons, and escape routes with the systematic efficiency that had kept her alive in far more dangerous environments. "The service corridor I mentioned connects to a freight elevator that's independent of the main building systems," Elena explained, pulling out her courier access card. "I have authorization to use it for document transport, which means it might still be operational even if they've disabled the passenger elevators." Morrison was rapidly redistributing equipment from a locked cabinet that Elena hadn't noticed before. The fact that Blackwater kept tactical gear in their conference room spoke to the serious nature of their operations, and the SEALs were arming themselves with the professional efficiency of people who treated deadly situations as routine occupational hazards. "What's the service corridor access point?" Mitchell asked, checking the action on a pistol that had appeared from somewhere Elena hadn't been watching. Elena led them to what appeared to be a utility closet near the reception area. Her courier keycard opened the door to reveal a narrow corridor lined with electrical conduits and ventilation ducts that most building occupants never knew existed. The space was cramped and institutional, but it offered concealment and an alternative route through the building's infrastructure. "This corridor runs parallel to the main hallway and connects to the mechanical room," Elena explained, her voice taking on the clipped efficiency of operational briefings. "From there, we can access the freight elevator or the emergency stairwell that's isolated from the main building systems." Park was monitoring the main corridor through security cameras at his desk. "They're moving methodically floor by floor, but they're definitely heading toward us. Estimate maybe 10 minutes before they reach this level." Elena's mind automatically calculated timing and movement patterns. If they're professionals, they'll have scouted the building layout and identified our defensive positions. The conference room windows make us visible from multiple angles, and they'll assume we're armed and prepared for a siege. "What they won't expect," Morrison added, following Elena's tactical reasoning, is for us to abandon our defensive position and go mobile through building infrastructure they probably don't know about. Williams had been studying the building schematics Elena had noticed earlier. Rodriguez, this service route you're describing, does it provide access to other floors? Elena nodded, visualizing the maintenance route she'd observed during months of deliveries. The freight elevator connects to a loading dock on the ground level that's separate from the main lobby, but more importantly, it provides access to every floor without going through the main corridor checkpoints. Mitchell was coordinating with external contacts through an encrypted communication device that Elena recognized as military-grade equipment. Federal response teams are en route, but they're dealing with multiple simultaneous incidents across the city. We're looking at least 30 minutes before tactical support arrives. 30 minutes is a lifetime in a tactical situation, Chief Rodriguez observed grimly, especially if they're planning to eliminate witnesses or destroy intelligence. Elena found herself thinking through possibilities that went beyond simple escape. If this assault is connected to the maritime hostage situation, they might be planning to destroy your operational planning materials and eliminate the personnel capable of conducting the rescue. Joe. Morrison's expression showed he'd reached the same conclusion. Which means running away might not be sufficient. We might need to neutralize this threat to preserve the capability to save those hostages. Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. For 6 months, she'd avoided situations where other people's lives depended on her decisions. But the convergence of crises, the hostages in the Persian Gulf and the immediate threat in their building, was demanding exactly the kind of tactical leadership she'd spent years developing. "Sir," Elena said, addressing Mitchell with the directness of someone proposing a military operation, "I know this building's infrastructure better than anyone, including the attackers. If we're going to take action rather than just escape, I can provide tactical advantages they won't anticipate." Mitchell studied her for a moment, clearly weighing the unusual situation of relying on tactical advice from someone whose official status was civilian courier. "What are you thinking?" Elena moved to the building's schematic, her tactical mind working through possibilities she would never have considered during her courier routines. The attackers are assuming we're trapped on this floor with limited options. But the service infrastructure provides access to positions above and below them. We could potentially flank their approach or create diversions that split their attention. "You're talking about conducting an offensive operation," Morrison said, his tone indicating both interest and concern. "Against professionals with superior firepower in an environment full of civilians." Elena nodded, acknowledging the complexity and danger of what she was suggesting. The building has approximately 300 occupants on 22 floors. If the attackers are willing to conduct a military-style assault in downtown Seattle, they're not concerned about civilian casualties. Waiting for law enforcement might result in more casualties than taking direct action. Park's voice interrupted their tactical planning with urgent information. "Movement on our floor. 2 individuals have exited the stairwell and are approaching our position. They're moving like they know exactly where they're going." Elena could see through the reception area windows that the attackers were indeed moving with purpose rather than searching randomly. They carried their weapons with professional competence and communicated through throat microphones with the coordination of a well-trained team. "They have floor plans and specific target information," Elena observed. "This isn't reconnaissance. They're conducting a planned assault." Williams had positioned himself where he could observe the attackers' approach without being seen. Professional movement, quality equipment, and tactical coordination. These aren't criminals or terrorists. They're military contractors or foreign operatives. Elena felt her tactical instincts sharpening as the situation became more clearly defined. The pattern of the assault, the coordination with events in the Persian Gulf, and the sophisticated intelligence about Blackwater's operations suggested a level of resources that went beyond typical criminal enterprises. "If they're foreign operatives," Elena said, working through the implications, "then this assault is designed to prevent American military intervention in the hostage situation. Which means the 12 hostages are expendable compared to eliminating our rescue capability." Mitchell's expression hardened as he processed what Elena was suggesting. "You're saying this isn't just about stopping one rescue operation. It's about demonstrating that American special operations can be neutralized." "Yes, sir. And that makes this a national security issue rather than just a building security problem." Morrison was checking his equipment and preparing for immediate action. "Rodriguez, if we're going to do this, we need to move now before they establish defensive positions." Elena felt the transformation completing itself as operational necessity overrode civilian caution. I can guide us through the service infrastructure to positions that will give us tactical advantages. But once we commit to offensive action, there's no going back to being invisible. Mitchell looked around the room at his team, then back at Elena. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you've been out of uniform for 6 months. Are you prepared to go back to war? Elena thought about the 12 hostages depending on the people in this room, the hundreds of building occupants whose safety now hung in the balance, and the part of herself she'd been suppressing for 6 months, that understood how to solve problems when conventional approaches weren't sufficient. Sir, Elena replied, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who'd found her way back to who she really was. I never really left. The sound of the attackers testing the main office doors reached them through the building's acoustics. Elena led the team toward the service corridor, her courier knowledge transforming into tactical intelligence that would determine whether they lived or died in the next 30 minutes. Outside, Seattle continued its normal afternoon routine, unaware that a battle for national security was about to be fought in the service corridors and mechanical spaces of a downtown office building by a woman who'd spent 6 months pretending she was someone else. The service corridor was a maze of mechanical systems and building infrastructure that Elena navigated with the precision of someone who'd spent 6 months unconsciously mapping every maintenance route in the Meridian building. What had once been routine courier pathways now became tactical advantages as she led the SEAL team through spaces their attackers couldn't have anticipated. The narrow passage was cramped and poorly lit, but it provided concealment and access to positions that would have been impossible through conventional routes. Elena moved with the fluid silence of someone whose training had emphasized stealth infiltration, her body automatically adjusting to the confined space while her mind calculated distances, timing, and tactical opportunities. Behind her, Morrison and his team followed with the professional discipline of operators who understood that their lives now depended on intelligence from someone they'd known as a courier 20 minutes ago. The freight elevator is 30 meters ahead, Elena whispered, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the team without echoing through the service corridor. It connects to a loading dock that provides independent access to street level, but more importantly, it gives us vertical mobility without using compromised stairwells. Mitchell's voice came through their improvised communication system with updates from building security. Park is monitoring their movement through internal cameras. They've breached our office perimeter and are systematically searching for personnel and operational materials. Elena paused at a junction where the service corridor intersected with the building's main mechanical room. Through ventilation grates, she could hear the attackers moving through the Blackwater offices, with the methodical efficiency of people conducting a planned extraction rather than a random assault. Their coordination and tactical discipline confirmed her assessment that they were facing professional operatives rather than criminals. They're not finding what they're looking for, Elena observed, listening to the pattern of their movement. Which means they'll either expand their search parameters or escalate their tactics to force us out of concealment. Morrison positioned himself where he could observe the main corridor through a maintenance access panel. Rodriguez, your assessment of their numbers and equipment? Elena's tactical mind processed everything she'd observed during their approach. Minimum 4 individuals, possibly 6. Military-grade automatic weapons, body armor, and communication equipment that suggests coordination with external command. They're moving like a military unit conducting a precision operation. Williams had accessed the building's emergency communication system through a maintenance terminal. Federal response teams are still dealing with coordinated incidents across the city. We're looking at extended timeline before tactical support arrives. Elena felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders. The situation was developing beyond a simple escape scenario into something that required active tactical intervention to prevent escalation. The attackers' professional competence and obvious intelligence about Blackwater's operations suggested they were prepared for extended operations and wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. Chief Rodriguez, Elena said, addressing the senior NCO with the directness of someone proposing a combat operation. The loading dock I mentioned provides access to multiple building levels through service elevators. If we can reach it, we can potentially flank their position or create diversions that force them to split their attention. Chief Rodriguez studied the building schematic Elena had been carrying, his tactical experience evident in the way he analyzed the infrastructure layout. You're suggesting we abandon the high ground and go mobile through hostile territory. I'm suggesting we use knowledge they don't possess to create tactical advantages they can't anticipate, Elena replied, her operational thinking overriding civilian caution. They're conducting this assault based on standard building layouts and conventional defensive assumptions. The service infrastructure provides options they haven't planned for. Morrison's expression showed he was working through the possibilities Elena was presenting. If we can access different levels through the freight system, we could potentially isolate their team or cut off their extraction routes. Elena nodded, her mind automatically calculating movement patterns and tactical opportunities. The service elevator connects to the parking garage level, which has independent ventilation and communication systems. From there, we could coordinate with external response teams or position ourselves to interdict their escape routes. Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone making command decisions under extreme pressure. Rodriguez, you're describing offensive operations against unknown numbers in a civilian environment. That's beyond the scope of standard defensive tactics. Elena understood the weight of what she was proposing. Military operations in civilian environments required careful consideration of collateral damage and escalation potential. But the attacker's sophistication and obvious intelligence suggested they were prepared for extended operations that could result in significant casualties. Sir, respectfully, these aren't standard defensive circumstances, Elena replied. The coordination with events in the Persian Gulf and the intelligence they've demonstrated about our operations suggests this is a planned elimination rather than a containment operation. The sound of systematic destruction reached them through the building's acoustics, furniture being overturned, equipment being destroyed, and the methodical search of operational materials. Elena recognized the pattern from combat environments where enemy forces were attempting to eliminate intelligence capabilities rather than simply neutralize immediate threats. They're destroying everything, Park's voice came through their communication system with barely controlled anger. Computers, files, communication equipment, anything that could be used for operational planning. Elena felt her tactical instincts sharpening as the situation clarified. That confirms this is about eliminating rescue capability rather than just neutralizing immediate threats. Which means waiting for law enforcement response might not prevent mission failure. Morrison was checking his equipment and preparing for movement. Rodriguez, if we commit to this course of action, we're crossing from defensive to offensive operations. Once we start, there's no going back to civilian status. Elena thought about the 12 hostages whose rescue depended on the people in this room, the building occupants whose safety was now compromised, and the part of herself she'd been suppressing for 6 months that understood how to solve problems when conventional approaches weren't sufficient. Lieutenant Commander, Elena said, using Morrison's rank with the respect of someone addressing a fellow operator. I've been a civilian for 6 months, but I've been a soldier for 8 years. When lives are at stake, that's not a choice, it's an obligation. The freight elevator was exactly where Elena had indicated, hidden behind maintenance doors that most building occupants never noticed. Her courier access card still functioned, providing them entry to a service system that connected every floor of the building through routes their attackers couldn't have anticipated. The loading dock is 3 levels down, Elena explained as the elevator descended through the building's mechanical core. It provides access to parking levels, utility tunnels, and emergency systems that connect to city infrastructure. Chief Rodriguez was studying the tactical possibilities their new position provided. From the parking level, we could potentially access adjacent buildings or coordinate with response teams without exposing ourselves to the primary assault force. Elena nodded, but her tactical mind was working through more complex possibilities. Or we could use the building's infrastructure to position ourselves above their current location and create tactical pressure that forces them to abandon their current operation. Morrison looked at her with growing respect. You're thinking like a special operations planner. Elena felt the transformation completing itself as operational necessity overrode months of civilian conditioning. I am a special operations planner. I've been pretending to be something else, but pretending doesn't change what you know how to do when people need you to do it. The elevator reached the loading dock level, revealing an industrial space that connected to the building's mechanical core through service tunnels Elena had observed during her courier rounds. What had once been routine delivery infrastructure now became the foundation for tactical operations that would determine whether they could preserve the capability to save 12 hostages half a world away. Elena stepped out of the elevator with the confidence of someone who'd found her way back to abilities she'd tried to abandon, leading a team of Navy SEALs through territory she knew better than anyone else in the building. The loading dock felt like stepping into a different world, industrial, utilitarian, and connected to city infrastructure in ways that transformed Elena's understanding of tactical possibilities. Her 6 months of courier work had given her access to areas of the building that even security personnel rarely visited, and now that knowledge became the foundation for operations that could determine the outcome of multiple crises simultaneously. Elena led the team through service tunnels that connected to adjacent buildings, utility systems that provided communication alternatives, and mechanical spaces that offered concealment and mobility options their attackers couldn't have anticipated. The transformation from invisible courier to tactical operator was now complete, her military training seamlessly integrating with intimate knowledge of the building's infrastructure. The parking garage connects to a utility tunnel system that serves the entire downtown block, Elena explained, moving through the industrial space with purposeful efficiency. From here, we can access communication systems, coordinate with external response teams, or position ourselves to interdict their extraction routes. Morrison was coordinating with federal response teams through encrypted communication equipment, his updates painting a picture of coordinated attacks across multiple locations. The simultaneous incidents were designed to delay law enforcement response and provide cover for this operation. Someone with serious resources planned this to eliminate American Special Operations capability. Elena felt her tactical mind working through implications that extended far beyond their immediate survival. If they succeed in destroying Blackwater's operational planning and eliminating the personnel capable of conducting the Persian Gulf rescue, 12 hostages die, and American credibility in maritime security operations is compromised. The weight of that responsibility drove Elena's tactical thinking as she guided the team through infrastructure that most people never knew existed. Her courier routes had unconsciously mapped emergency systems, communication networks, and access points that now became critical military intelligence. Chief Rodriguez had accessed building emergency systems through a maintenance terminal, providing real-time information about the attackers' movements. They've completed their search of the 22nd floor and are expanding operations to adjacent levels. Patterns suggest they're looking for personnel rather than just destroying equipment. Elena analyzed the tactical situation with growing clarity. They need to confirm elimination of key personnel to complete their mission, which means they'll either expand their search parameters or attempt to force us into the open through escalation. Williams was monitoring external communications through equipment Elena recognized as military-grade tactical systems. Federal tactical teams are en route, but they're dealing with coordinated incidents that appear designed to stretch response capabilities across the entire metropolitan area. Elena understood the strategic implications of what Williams was describing. Classic asymmetric warfare. Use limited resources to force the enemy to divide attention across multiple simultaneous threats. It suggests foreign military planning rather than criminal enterprise. Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone making command decisions under extreme pressure. Rodriguez, your assessment of our tactical options from this position? Elena studied the building infrastructure around them, her mind automatically calculating possibilities that combined her courier knowledge with 8 years of military training. We have 3 basic approaches. We can use the service systems to exit the building and coordinate with external response teams. We can position ourselves to interdict their extraction routes and force them into tactical disadvantage. Or we can use the building infrastructure to create tactical pressure that forces them to abandon their current operation. Morrison was checking equipment and preparing for immediate action. What's your recommendation? Elena felt the weight of operational decision-making settling on her shoulders, but it felt natural in a way that 6 months of civilian life never had. Their mission requires confirmation of personnel elimination and destruction of operational capability. If we can demonstrate that both objectives have failed, they'll be forced to choose between escalation and withdrawal. The service tunnel system Elena had discovered during her courier work provided access to communication systems that connected to city emergency services. Her knowledge of the building's infrastructure, combined with the SEAL's tactical expertise, created opportunities their attackers couldn't have anticipated. The building's emergency communication system connects to federal law enforcement networks, Elena explained, accessing terminals she'd observed during months of maintenance deliveries. We can coordinate directly with incoming tactical teams and provide intelligence about the attackers' positions and capabilities. Chief Rodriguez was analyzing building schematics with the systematic efficiency of someone planning complex operations. Rodriguez, this infrastructure knowledge you've developed, it's not standard courier training. Elena smiled grimly. 8 years of military training teaches you to automatically assess tactical environments. I've been unconsciously mapping this building's defensive and offensive capabilities since my first delivery. The coordination with external response teams proceeded with the efficiency of people accustomed to life-or-death operations. Elena's building knowledge provided tactical intelligence that federal teams couldn't have obtained through conventional reconnaissance, while the SEAL's expertise ensured that intelligence was translated into effective operational planning. Boris, Morrison's encrypted communication with incoming tactical teams confirmed that Elena's assessment had been accurate. Federal response confirms multiple coordinated incidents designed to delay tactical support. The attackers are foreign operatives conducting planned elimination of American special operations capability. Elena felt the satisfaction of tactical analysis proven correct, but also the weight of responsibility for ensuring that analysis translated into successful outcomes, which means our survival isn't just about personal safety. It's about preserving the capability to save 12 hostages and demonstrate that American special operations can't be neutralized by foreign interference. The sound of federal tactical teams entering the building reached them through the emergency communication system. Elena's knowledge of building infrastructure allowed her to guide the response teams through service routes that bypassed the attackers' defensive positions, while the SEALs coordinated tactical approaches that leveraged both building knowledge and special operations expertise. Within 40 minutes of the initial alarm, the coordinated response had neutralized the attackers and preserved both the personnel and equipment necessary for the Persian Gulf rescue operation. Elena found herself standing in the building's lobby, surrounded by federal agents and tactical teams, trying to process the transformation from invisible courier to operational asset. Commander Mitchell approached her with an expression that combined respect, gratitude, and calculation. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I have a question for you." Elena straightened unconsciously, her military bearing reasserting itself after months of civilian suppression. "Yes, sir?" "Those 12 hostages in the Persian Gulf are still counting on us to plan their rescue. Are you interested in going back to work?" Elena looked around the lobby where she'd spent 6 months being invisible, then up toward the floors where her courier routes had unconsciously prepared her for tactical operations she'd tried to leave behind. "Sir," Elena replied, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who'd rediscovered her true purpose, "I never really stopped working." 6 months later, Major Elena Rodriguez stood in the same briefing room where she'd first revealed her military background, but everything had changed. The space that had once been a corporate conference room now served as the headquarters for Blackwater's Integrated Crisis Response Unit, a specialized division that combined maritime security, hostage rescue, and asymmetric threat analysis. Elena commanded a team of operators whose skills bridged military special operations and civilian crisis management, proving that the most effective solutions often came from unexpected combinations of expertise. The wall displays showed real-time intelligence from 3 ongoing operations around the world. The Persian Gulf hostage rescue had been successfully completed within 72 hours of the Seattle building assault, but that victory had led to increased demand for the kind of hybrid tactical capability Elena had pioneered. Her unit now handled crises that fell between traditional military operations and civilian law enforcement, filling a gap that few people had recognized until it became critical. Lieutenant Commander Morrison entered the briefing room carrying files that Elena recognized as preliminary intelligence for their next operation. Their working relationship had evolved from mutual respect based on shared competence to genuine partnership between professionals who understood that the most dangerous missions required the best available talent regardless of conventional organizational boundaries. "Elena, we've got a situation developing in the South China Sea that has some familiar characteristics," Morrison said, spreading satellite imagery across the tactical table. "Commercial vessels being systematically targeted by what appears to be state-sponsored pirates, but with coordination and equipment that suggests military planning." Elena studied the intelligence photographs with the analytical precision she'd developed through months of combining tactical expertise with strategic thinking. The pattern Morrison was describing matched scenarios they'd encountered before: criminal activities that served strategic purposes for hostile governments, requiring responses that conventional military doctrine didn't adequately address. "What's the client situation?" Elena asked, automatically processing the operational parameters that would determine their approach. Morrison pulled up financial and political assessments that showed the complexity of modern maritime security. Multiple shipping companies with vessels from 6 different countries, all carrying cargo that has strategic importance for Pacific trade routes. The attackers are specifically targeting vessels that carry technology components and rare earth minerals. Elena felt her tactical mind working through implications that extended beyond immediate rescue operations. They're not just conducting piracy for financial gain, they're systematically disrupting supply chains that support American technology industries. Chief Rodriguez entered the briefing room with updates from their intelligence network, his analysis confirming Elena's strategic assessment. The timing and target selection show coordination with broader geopolitical objectives. Someone is using criminal activities to achieve strategic goals that would be difficult to accomplish through conventional military action. Elena nodded, recognizing the pattern from previous operations her unit had handled. Asymmetric warfare disguised as criminal enterprise. It's becoming the standard approach for adversaries who can't challenge American military power directly. Williams approached with communication intercepts that provided additional context for the developing situation. NSA has been tracking communications between the attacking vessels and coordination centers that appear to be located in disputed territorial waters. The level of tactical coordination suggests military planning and intelligence support. Elena's unit had developed expertise in exactly these kinds of hybrid threats through operations that combined Elena's tactical background with specialized training in maritime law, international relations, and economic warfare. Their success in the Persian Gulf had demonstrated that traditional military approaches needed to be supplemented with understanding of civilian systems and unconventional operational methods. "What's the timeline for intervention?" Elena asked, beginning the strategic planning process that had become routine for her team. Morrison displayed operational charts that showed the complexity of conducting rescue operations in internationally disputed waters. "The window for effective intervention is narrowing rapidly. Once the attacking vessels reach territorial waters claimed by hostile governments, our operational options become severely limited." Elena studied the geographic and political constraints that would shape their tactical approach. "We're looking at the same kind of time-sensitive operation that required innovative thinking in the Persian Gulf, but with additional complications from international law and territorial disputes." David Park had been promoted to senior intelligence analyst for Elena's unit, and his assessment of the current situation reflected the sophisticated analysis capability they'd developed. "The attacking force is using tactics we've seen before. Professional military coordination disguised as criminal opportunism, designed to create maximum strategic impact while maintaining plausible deniability." Elena felt the satisfaction of seeing patterns that her unique background allowed her to recognize. "Which means our response needs to be equally sophisticated, tactical precision combined with strategic understanding of the broader implications." The planning session that followed demonstrated how Elena's unit had evolved beyond conventional military or civilian approaches to crisis management. Her team included former special operations personnel, maritime law specialists, intelligence analysts, and technology experts who could address the full spectrum of modern security challenges. "The key to success in this operation," Elena explained to her team, "is understanding that we're not just conducting a rescue mission. We're demonstrating that American crisis response capability can adapt to threats that don't fit traditional categories." Commander Mitchell entered the briefing room with authorization documents that confirmed the scope of their mandate. "Elena, your unit has been given full operational authority for this mission. Washington recognizes that conventional approaches aren't adequate for the threats we're facing." Elena felt the weight of responsibility that came with operational command, but also the confidence that came from proven success in similar situations. "Sir, we'll need coordination with multiple agencies and international partners, but our experience suggests that integrated operations are more effective than traditional organizational boundaries." The mission planning that followed utilized every skill Elena had developed during her transformation from invisible courier to tactical commander. Her understanding of civilian systems, combined with military expertise and hard-won experience in crisis management, created operational capabilities that no single organization could have achieved independently. As her team prepared for deployment to the South China Sea, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her from delivering papers in downtown Seattle to commanding complex international operations. The skills she'd tried to suppress for 6 months had not only returned but had evolved into something more sophisticated and effective than purely military approaches. Major Rodriguez Morrison said as the briefing concluded, "Any thoughts about how far we've come since that day in the conference room?" Elena looked around the operations center that had grown from a chance encounter during a routine document delivery. "I've learned that the most important missions are often the ones that nobody else thinks are possible, and that sometimes the best way to serve your country is to become something that didn't exist before you decided it needed to exist." The helicopter that would carry Elena's team to their next impossible mission was already warming up on the building's roof, its rotors cutting through the Seattle air with the precision of people who understood that excellence meant being ready for whatever the world demanded. 2 years after the Seattle building assault that had changed everything, Elena Rodriguez found herself standing before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., testifying about the evolution of modern security threats and the innovative approaches required to address them. The hearing room was filled with lawmakers, military officials, and policy experts who were trying to understand how a former document courier had become one of America's most effective crisis response commanders. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chairwoman, leaned forward with the intensity of someone grappling with complex national security issues. "Major Rodriguez, your unit has successfully resolved 18 international crises that conventional military and law enforcement agencies were unable to address. Can you explain to this committee what makes your approach different?" Elena looked across the hearing room, seeing faces that represented the full spectrum of American government trying to understand threats that didn't fit traditional categories. "Senator, modern adversaries don't respect the organizational boundaries that have traditionally defined our response capabilities. They use criminal methods to achieve strategic objectives, operate in legal gray areas that complicate military intervention, and exploit the gaps between civilian and military authority." The congressman from Texas, Representative Martinez, interrupted with the directness of someone who'd served in the military before entering politics. "Major, are you saying that our existing institutions are inadequate for current threats?" Elena chose her words carefully, understanding that her testimony would influence policy decisions that affected national security. "Sir, I'm saying that threats have evolved faster than our institutional responses. The most dangerous adversaries today combine criminal tactics, military planning, economic warfare, and political manipulation in ways that require equally integrated responses." Senator Williams displayed a chart showing the increasing complexity of international security incidents over the past decade. "Your unit's success rate suggests that traditional approaches are indeed insufficient. Can you describe the fundamental differences in your methodology?" Elena thought about the journey from invisible courier to congressional witness, recognizing that her unique perspective came from experiencing both civilian vulnerability and military capability. "Senator, my background taught me that the most effective solutions often come from understanding systems that most specialists never see. I spent months observing how civilian infrastructure actually works, how private sector organizations make decisions under pressure, and how ordinary people respond to extraordinary circumstances." Representative Johnson from California, who served on both the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees, asked the question Elena had been expecting. "Major Rodriguez, critics argue that your unit operates outside established chains of command and accountability structures. How do you respond to concerns about oversight and legal authority?" Elena had anticipated this challenge and prepared her response carefully. Representative Johnson, "Accountability in crisis situations requires results, not just process. My unit operates under clear legal authority provided by existing statutes, but we've proven that flexibility in execution often determines the difference between success and failure when lives are at stake." The hearing continued for 3 hours, covering everything from operational methodology to budget allocations to international law implications. Elena answered each question with the precision of someone who'd learned to translate tactical expertise into policy language, but her core message remained consistent. Effective crisis response required people who understood multiple systems and could operate across traditional boundaries. During a brief recess, Senator Williams approached Elena privately. "Major, off the record, how did you know that your approach would work? Most military professionals would have been skeptical of combining courier knowledge with special operations tactics." Elena smiled, remembering the moment in the Blackwater conference room when she'd first spoken up about tidal patterns. "Senator, I didn't know it would work. I just knew that the conventional approaches weren't adequate for the problems we were facing." Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones you make when you're not sure they'll work, but you're certain that doing nothing won't work. The afternoon session focused on policy recommendations and resource requirements for expanding Elena's integrated approach to other government agencies. She presented a comprehensive plan for training programs that would prepare future crisis response professionals to work across organizational boundaries, combining military tactics with civilian expertise and international law with practical problem-solving. General Patricia Hayes, who had become Elena's strongest advocate within the Pentagon, testified about the strategic value of the integrated approach. This committee should understand that Major Rodriguez's unit has prevented 3 potential wars, saved over 200 lives, and demonstrated American crisis response capability in situations where conventional military action would have been politically impossible. Elena's final presentation to the committee outlined a vision for American security that went beyond traditional military dominance to include sophisticated understanding of civilian systems, economic networks, and cultural dynamics that shaped modern conflicts. The threats we face today require people who can think like soldiers, understand business, navigate international law, and communicate with civilians who've never experienced military culture. Representative Martinez asked the crucial question that would determine funding and expansion decisions. Major Rodriguez, if Congress authorizes the resources you're requesting, can you guarantee that this integrated approach will continue to be effective as adversaries adapt to our new capabilities? Elena considered the question carefully, recognizing that her answer would influence decisions that affected national security for years to come. Representative Martinez, I can guarantee that we'll continue to adapt and innovate faster than our adversaries because our approach is based on understanding systems rather than following fixed procedures. The moment we stop learning and evolving is the moment we become vulnerable to enemies who never stop trying to find new ways to hurt us. The committee vote to authorize expansion of Elena's integrated crisis response model passed by a margin that surprised even her strongest supporters. As she left the Capitol building, Elena reflected on the transformation that had begun with delivering papers and evolved into reshaping how America responded to threats that didn't fit traditional categories. Her phone buzzed with a message from Morrison. Elena, we've got a situation developing in Eastern Europe that has some familiar characteristics. State-sponsored hackers targeting civilian infrastructure, while criminal organizations conduct physical attacks on transportation networks. Sound like something we might be interested in. Elena typed her response while walking toward the helicopter that would carry her back to Seattle. Jake, it sounds like exactly the kind of problem that conventional approaches aren't designed to handle. When do we deploy? As Washington, D.C. fell away beneath her, Elena looked ahead toward challenges that would require every skill she'd developed during her unlikely journey from invisible courier to national security innovator. The future would demand people who could see connections that others missed, operate across boundaries that others respected, and solve problems that others considered impossible. Elena Rodriguez had spent 6 months learning to be invisible, but she'd spent the rest of her career proving that the most important solutions often came from people who refused to stay hidden when the world needed them to step forward. 5 years after that first emergency alarm in the Meridian building, Elena Rodriguez stood at the podium of the National Defense University, addressing a packed auditorium of military officers, intelligence analysts, and policymakers from around the world. The woman who had once made herself invisible while delivering papers was now teaching the next generation of leaders how to see threats that others missed and solve problems that conventional wisdom declared impossible. The most dangerous assumption in modern security, Elena told her audience, is that expertise belongs in separate categories. The enemies we face today don't respect the boundaries between military and civilian, between criminal and political, between local and international. They succeed because they understand connections that we've trained ourselves not to see. In the front row sat Lieutenant Commander Morrison, now Admiral Morrison, and head of Naval Special Warfare Command. Beside him was General Hayes, who had become chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Elena's most influential supporter in transforming how America approached crisis response. Both had traveled from Washington specifically to hear Elena deliver the keynote address at the annual Integrated Security Symposium. Elena's presentation used case studies from her unit's operations to demonstrate how unconventional thinking had resolved crises that traditional approaches couldn't handle. The hostage rescue in the Persian Gulf had become a textbook example of adaptive tactical planning. The Seattle building assault was studied as a model for defending against hybrid threats. Her unit's subsequent operations had established new standards for international crisis response. The courier who delivered papers to your offices might have served in special operations, Elena continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd proven her theories under fire. The maintenance worker who fixes your computers might understand cyber warfare better than your IT specialists. The translator working with your overseas operations might have insights about local politics that your intelligence analysts are missing. As Elena concluded her presentation, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her understanding of what service meant. She'd learned that true invisibility wasn't about hiding your capabilities. It was about being so essential that others couldn't imagine functioning without you. Elena Rodriguez had spent 6 months delivering papers, but she'd spent her career delivering solutions to problems that threatened everything she'd sworn to protect. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of her professional achievements. It was acknowledgement that sometimes the most important revolutions began with someone refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they'd always been. 10 years after the emergency alarm that changed everything, Elena Rodriguez received a phone call that brought her full circle. Sarah Chen, the junior associate from Morrison, Klein & Banks who had once barely acknowledged her existence, was now a senior partner dealing with a maritime security crisis that conventional consultants couldn't solve. Major Rodriguez, Sarah's voice carried a mixture of professional respect and personal embarrassment. I need to ask for your help with a situation that our traditional security consultants can't handle. We have clients facing the same kind of hybrid threats your unit specializes in. Elena smiled, remembering the woman who had once treated her as invisible furniture while discussing cases that Elena could have solved in her sleep. Sarah, I'd be happy to help. What's the situation? The conversation that followed demonstrated how dramatically the world had changed. Sarah described attacks that combined cyber warfare, economic manipulation, and physical threats in ways that required exactly the kind of integrated response Elena's unit had pioneered. But more importantly, Sarah spoke with genuine respect for Elena's expertise and clear understanding of why conventional approaches weren't adequate. I have to admit, Sarah said during their planning session, I never imagined that the courier who delivered our documents was more qualified to handle our security problems than the expensive consultants we were hiring. Elena met with Sarah in the same conference room where she'd once listened to discussions about maritime insurance disasters while being treated as part of the furniture. Now she sat at the head of the table, leading strategic planning sessions that would determine the safety of international shipping operations and the stability of global supply chains. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Elena's success had inspired changes throughout government and private sector organizations, encouraging leaders to recognize expertise wherever it existed rather than where they expected to find it. Her integrated approach had become standard procedure for crisis response units around the world. As Elena left the Morrison, Klein & Banks offices after successfully resolving Sarah's crisis, she paused in the lobby where she'd once wheeled her courier cart past security guards who barely noticed her existence. The same granite floors reflected the same overhead lights, but everything else had changed. Elena Rodriguez had proven that invisibility was temporary, but competence was permanent. Sometimes the most important transformations began with someone deciding that being underestimated was an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Elena walked through the Meridian Building's lobby one final time, her footsteps echoing against the same granite floors where she'd once been invisible. The security guards now stood at attention, recognizing the woman who had transformed from overlooked courier to national security innovator. But Elena's attention was drawn to something that made her smile. A young woman in a courier uniform was wheeling a cart toward the elevators, her movements efficient but unremarkable. Most people didn't notice her. Just another face delivering papers, another invisible worker keeping the city functioning. But Elena saw something else in the woman's posture, the way she automatically assessed the lobby's layout, the subtle alertness that suggested military training beneath civilian clothes. Elena approached quietly. "Excuse me, what's your name?" The courier looked up, surprised to be addressed by someone in an expensive suit. "Maria Santos, ma'am." "Just delivering documents." "What did you do before courier work, Maria?" Maria hesitated, then straightened slightly. "Army logistics, ma'am. 2 tours in Iraq. But that's not really relevant to this job." Elena handed Maria her business card. "Maria Santos. I run a crisis response unit that specializes in solving impossible problems. We're always looking for people who understand that the most important skills are often the ones that others can't see. Would you be interested in a conversation about your future? Maria stared at the card, her expression shifting from confusion to possibility. Ma'am, are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities come disguised as ordinary moments. The question is, are you ready to stop being invisible? As Elena walked away, she knew that Maria's story was just beginning, and that somewhere in the world another impossible crisis was waiting for someone brave enough to step out of the shadows. What would you do if everyone saw you as invisible until the moment they desperately needed you to save them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of courage, transformation, and the power of hidden potential. Hit that notification bell. You never know when the next impossible story will inspire you to see yourself differently.